YouTube. And so if you missed some of them or want to see them again, they're up there. I suppose you can find that link through the Sheltering Branch Facebook page. And you'll be happy to know that I met with the Western Washington Summer School last night to talk about their program. And they'll be posting the links to these classes as a prelude to their sessions in August, and suggest that people watch them before they come to the Western Washington Summer School as well. So we're kind of linking hands across the region, sharing each other's learning. It's kind of fun. So friends, this morning in our last hour and a half, there's a few things that I'm hoping we can cover. I'm going to start by spending a little bit of time with the House of Justice letters, where they address both the difficulties that we face in pursuing freedom from racial prejudice, especially within the Baha'i community, and then also the strategies that they have outlined for us in some of the letters. My hope is also that at the very end of the class, we'll end by reading the National Assembly's statement on race unity to the American people, and that might give you some both language but also ideas about how you might use the statement in your communities, in your hometowns, in your workplaces, in how local assemblies might want to do what the National Assembly did and post this statement in their newspapers. The National Assembly bought a full-page ad in the Chicago Tribune and released this statement in the Chicago Tribune before any of us actually got it on Juneteenth. So it was a beautiful full-page ad with a great big picture of the House of Worship, which of course for Chicago is meaningful because everybody knows about the House of Worship in Chicago. You may choose to use other graphics depending on where you are if you decide to do this. And then they just posted this. The majority of that full page was this statement. And then they shared it with us for us to do whatever it is we felt would be helpful as well. So we'll read that at the end of the class today. Let's start by looking at one of the stories that's in the Abdu'l-Baha and Race Unity compilation. So if you can find that, and Ruby, I suppose, hopefully someone has posted the link because I know we have new people. Yeah, they're all there. The links are there. So Abdu'l-Baha and Race Unity is the one we're going to be looking at for a moment. And we're going to turn to page 12. And let's see. Let me ask for a reader.
On which one, Erica?
It's the Race Unity one, the Abdu'l-Baha and Race Unity one. Page 12, it's number 21. Okay, Mary Beth, you're gonna read it? Sold. Turn on your, yeah, there we go.
Number 21?
Number 21, the next morning. Mm-hmm.
The next morning, he made a visit to the humble home of one of the friends. The only public address of Abdu'l-Baha in Berkeley was given the evening of October 9th at the high school auditorium before a large and representative gathering. The next morning, Abdu'l-Baha made quite a different visit, not to one of the great universities, but to the humble home of one of the friends, Charles Tinsley, a colored man who was confined to his bed on account of a broken leg. During this visit, Abdu'l-Baha told a beautiful story of a ruler who trained the subject he loved best in order to fit him to hold the most important place in his kingdom, told how he scourged him and maimed him and caused him all manner of sorrow and suffering, that he might know for himself what these conditions were in reality, meanwhile assuring him that he loved him and that only through this training could he be fitted for the great place he had destined him to fill. And that's from Star of the West.
So with the backdrop of that story, a black Baha'i who was confined to his bed with a broken leg, we're going to read now, starting on the bottom of page 7 of the of our compilation of Achieving Race Unity, the updated compilation of the House of Justice messages. Derek, I wonder if possibly you would be willing to read this. It's fairly long. This letter addresses the difficulties that people have experienced, especially African-American Baha'is, in the pursuit of this. But it doesn't just dwell on it. It actually then goes into the solution mode.
Can I ask a question about where that is?
It's on page 7, down at the bottom of the page, the beginning of what is actually the 8th letter, but of course it's right below the number 7 because the way in which this is cited, the number is cited after the citation. So turn to page 7 in the one called Achieving Race Unity, the updated compilation. Everybody got it?
So my question is,
yes,
there's that 7. Is it above that, as in that part, or is it just below that number 7? That's
yeah, it starts out, surely racial prejudice has too long stained the fabric. You see it? Did that answer your question, Nikisha?
Great.
Yeah. All right, we're good. We're ready to go, and you're on the bottom of page 7, that first paragraph, right?
Yes.
Okay. I think we have some slow internet today, so we may occasionally break up.
Surely racial prejudice has for too long stained the fabric of life in the United States. And although the Baha'i community has made enormous strides in the past century, like in so many other aspects of the teachings, the response of the believers to this challenge has not yet reached the expectations Abdu'l-Baha held for them. While Shoghi Effendi clearly expressed that the solution to this problem rests with both races, it cannot be denied that any failure or lessening of effort in redressing the problem within the framework for the social and administrative affairs of the community has its most immediate and negative consequences on the minority, as the majority can lapse into the unconscious state the guardian warned them against. The House of Justice well appreciates that for a Baha'i, the unique injuries arising from one's interactions with a fellow believer can be especially painful.
Okay, Derek, we're going to dance together with this. Let's stop for a moment and just take a look at the profound, heartfelt acknowledgement of the House of Justice about the difficulties. And I don't know whether you want to make any comment or...
Not yet.
Not yet, okay. I might just say a few things, and that is that, you know, you hear right now the concept of white privilege, white fragility. There's a whole lot of sociological striving to understand the effect of racism and the contribution towards the systemic racism that pervades our culture and all of that. And as the House of Justice and the Guardian both reminded us, the Baha'is are not immune to the evils that stain the character of our nation. And here they point specifically to that the effects of the white majority, the majority, can lapse into the unconscious state that the Guardian has warned them against, and that has an effect on the minority. It has the greatest effect on the minority. And so the unconsciousness that a privileged group of people can fall into, and being unaware of what they might say or do, and the effect that it might have on their fellow believers of color, is one which the Guardian warned us about in the Advent of Divine Justice, when they said that oftentimes the white friends have an often unconscious sense of superiority. So that we now, in the current vernacular being used in the US, that's also referred to as white privilege. We also have experienced over the decades that I've been involved in this conversation in the US, very painful conversations when Black friends have tried to share their experience and the history, and white friends have become defensive and have said unfortunate things like, well, I didn't own slaves. It's not my fault, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's a whole book written about white fragility that might help us understand what that might be. Yesterday, we kind of touched on it when we had that I think it was a very meaningful conversation about pushback. And I was thinking about that conversation last night is just sort of reflecting on our class and realizing that another part of the majority culture is that we do push back. We do become defensive. In the culture of dominance, being wrong is very uncomfortable. And so we're raised in a culture that defends ourselves. We're also raised in a culture which is very goal-oriented, and so we are likely to make excuses. Well, but we were only trying to do this or that, and so I know it's puzzling. I mean, I have gone through, many of us have done our own private work, our own personal work, because that's what we have to do. We can't tell anybody else what to do. The Guardian told us all what to do. So as we each struggle with it, there are times when we are very puzzled because in our own cultural envelope, what we're doing is not meant to be hurtful. It's not meant to be to be patronizing. It isn't meant to be disrespectful. But we stand in the secure bounds of the majority culture and say, well, people just need to understand I didn't mean it that way. And yet, look at the fallout from our feeling like just because we didn't mean it that way, another person needs to understand that about us. So those are just a few examples. Mary Beth, I see your hand. Perhaps you're going to add to the examples.
Well, I was thinking about that a lot yesterday as well, and had to sign out early and went back and watched. And one of the things I really began thinking about is that, and just thinking about some interactions I've had on my own assembly and within my own community. And I think one thing that's really important for us to remember is that, you know, a lot of times when we go back and we reflect on, well, why did that happen the way it did? Instead of looking at it from, well, I know I was right because I have this point and this point and this point, is to say, well, that's my view. That's where I entered that conversation, instead of looking at what is the experience that the other person in that conversation brought to that. And could there be another way to look at it? And I think a lot of times, you know, we go with that, we forget that tongue is a smoldering fire or fewness of words. We tend to want to talk through it rather than to think through it, and to take some really reflective time. And I think that really is one of our biggest roadblocks in all of this, is not reflecting on what could the other person's experience be.
Yeah, and of course there's such good instruction from the Guardian about how the white people have to be patient with people who have suffered such long and such grievous and slow healing wounds. You know, there's a lot put on the shoulders of both, but since I'm looking at a majority white group right now, and I'm white, I can only speak from my experience. The other thing is that we can't keep looking at the wrong things. We can illustrate so we can help ourselves understand. But the strength in the Baha'i community is that we love Baha'u'llah. He has given us the blueprint. The Guardian has clearly laid out what is needed to solve the racial prejudice, the problem of racial prejudice. He has told us it's not going to be quick. He told us it was going to be a long and thorny road. And then referring back to this story that we read to begin with, Abdu'l-Baha over and over showed that those who have been chosen will be tested. So, you know, I think of all my Black Baha'i friends and how sturdy their love for Baha'u'llah is, and how they keep pushing forward despite the fact that oftentimes in the community where hopefully they might find refuge, they are finding the same experience that they might be finding to some degree in the world outside the Baha'i community. And because we love each other so much, I think there's a great desire for us to overcome, to do our part to overcome. So that's, you know, that's the first of the twofold moral purposes, right? First, to transform ourselves, and then to transform the society around us. So I also want to point out the style of this letter from the House of Justice. They start by acknowledging. So Mary Beth, you were saying part of, you know, how do we listen? Well, one of the ways is we acknowledge. And the House of Justice always acknowledges. It's not just on race. They always acknowledge whatever a writer has said. They feed back to them and say, and they often call this thoughtful letter, or we don't see the first paragraph here, but undoubtedly, because we see the pattern in other letters, they have said something personal and encouraging to the writer of the letter, who clearly took a risk writing to the Universal House of Justice to basically share, probably in very great detail, what their experience had been in the Baha'i community. And so watch the pattern of the way the House of Justice addresses these difficult issues. And the first thing they do is acknowledge. Yeah. All right, so Derek, I want you to keep reading, but I also want to give you the opportunity to offer a comment if you want to now. You don't have to.
The guidance provided to the Friends by the beloved guardian and the Universal House of Justice offers a clear way forward. As you know, Shoghi Effendi, in his masterful discourse in the Advent of Divine Justice, gives African American and white Baha'is detailed instructions as to their respective responsibilities in combating racial prejudice. A tremendous effort, he emphasized, is required by both races if their outlook, their manners, and conduct are to reflect in this darkened age the spirit and teachings of the faith of Baha'u'llah. Let neither think, he added, that such a problem can either easily or immediately be resolved. Each person of whatever race or background was called upon to take the initiative and not allow what he perceives to be the shortcomings of his fellow believers to be the cause of his becoming apathetic or vindictive. By responding to the situation within the spiritual framework, the guardian has devised one's actions may be imbued with the spirit of the faith, thus making them potent instruments for effecting a change in the hearts of those who have inherited attitudes tainted by racial prejudice. Beyond,
Sorry, let me just make a comment. Woven through this is the assumption that I'll do my work, you'll do your work. It's not my business to tell you about your work, and it's not your business to tell me about my work, right? So that's a spiritual principle across the board. We are not in the business of correcting each other's faults. We are not in the business of naming each other's faults. We all have to do our own work, and underlying all the principle, everything we do is the principle that overlooking the faults of others is a requirement. In fact, Abdu'l-Baha says the most hateful characteristic of man is fault finding. And so if we each plow our rows, as the guardian referred to, and we can be confident then that we're doing our work, and we don't allow our eyes to stray, to criticize others or try to change them. That's not our job. Our job is to change ourselves and to demonstrate that change in our deeds, right? So the House of Justice is reminding us that we got instructions from the guardian, but there's no permission in here for me to decide if my friend, black or white, is doing their job. Thank you, Derek.
I do have a comment. There's this, now I'm having a senior moment and I'm forgetting her name. She's doing she's writing a book based on what she says is that when we read, we have to read the advent of divine justice differently than how we read it.
Juanita McGee.
Yes,
You're
yes,
thinking about?
right,
Mhm,
yeah,
mhm.
but it was just interesting because I never thought of that approach until she had mentioned that it's a matter of how we read the advent of divine justice, and if we reread it instead of just reading it as narrative is what she uses the term, and then she says we need to reread it as an actual instruction manual.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I think we have more capability to do that now than we did, for, of course, in 1938 when we received this message, but even at the beginning of this plan, because we've been studying plan messages. We've actually been studying the guidance, and we've gained skills in how to study the guidance. And so now I think we can go back and look at the Guardian's guidance as guidance and be able to parse it and think about it. And so it's wonderful that he's doing that. Yeah. All right, ready to pick it up?
Yeah.
This
Beyond
next
the
paragraph lists a
spiritual-
lot of strategies. Yeah, go ahead.
Beyond the spiritual orientation to combating racial prejudice with which the Friends in the United States are well familiar, the House of Justice has in recent years attempted to bring to the attention of those who long to eradicate the blight of racism, and especially the African American believers, the potentialities for transformation inherent in the systemic implementation of the instruments and methods of the current series of plans. As the Friends pursue their efforts to promote growth and community building, social action, and involvement in the discourses of society, they will over time work increasingly with other well-meaning people to eliminate these and other problems that have so bedeviled the world. A profound illustration of the possibilities this approach holds is found in the video Frontiers of Learning, commissioned by the House of Justice and available on the website www.baha'i.org/frontiers. It describes how the translation of the teachings into processes of community building in some of the most advanced clusters is beginning to address deep-seated social ills. An example cited is the Bihar Sharif cluster of India, where the centuries-old oppressive caste system is gradually being dismantled at the grassroots. As the video shows, communities are learning to mix without regard to caste, and a mother states with profound conviction that she will never tell her child into which caste he was born so that he will feel neither inferior nor superior to another soul. The House of Justice longs to hear of bold action being taken by the Friends in the United States, who by implementing the essential activities of the 5-year plan and utilizing the spiritually transformative power of the Training Institute, begin to uproot racial prejudice in their neighborhoods.
So we see that the House of Justice is pointing us right back to having this be coherent with the plan, and showing us an example of how, if we carry out the plan, it can begin to dismantle at the grassroots this issue. What were you going to say, Derek?
Oh no, I was just going to continue reading.
Okay, all right. So I just wanted to draw a circle around that because almost every letter we've read, the House of Justice has reminded us that this is not something that's separate. This is something that's coherent and has to be a part of the vision of everything we're doing in the plan. And this is the solution. There is no solution outside of this. This is the solution. And so, you know, recently there was a Pupil of the Eye conference, and because it was virtual, a lot of Black friends from around the nation and probably outside the nation were able to attend this conference. They were doing their work with regard to what the Shoghi Effendi says is the work of the African American Baha'is. And everything in that, I wasn't able to attend that conference, I'm not Black, but what I heard was all of it was very consistent and all of it was focused with the plan and how the children's classes and the junior youth spiritual empowerment program and the devotional gatherings provide a way for us to undo this at the grassroots level. So we all, if there's any tiny little bit of curiosity or still a little bit of not quite sure how this fits, what we have to do is just hold ourselves to this standard, because if we try and step outside of it to do something on the edge or to distract ourselves to go over and say, no, we have to do this, that, or the other thing, we will miss the opportunity to do what the House of Justice in its infallible wisdom has shown us is a solution. And we now have, this letter was written in 2014, so they referenced Frontiers of Learning. Since then, we have a second video commissioned by the House of Justice called A Widening Embrace, which shows even more examples around the world of the Baha'is who have actually carried out the work of the plan and are now causing a profound change at the level of culture, overcoming centuries-old issues in their communities. Okay, shall we read on? Thank you.
Abdu'l-Baha made it clear that those who steadfastly strive to promote the oneness of humanity will endure hardship and injustice. And he taught that to be wronged and oppressed in the path of God is a divine gift, for it is a characteristic of the manifestations of God. And since the ancient beauty was exposed by day and night on the field of martyrdom, he counseled, let us in our turn labor hard and hear and ponder the counsels of God. Let us fling away our lives and renounce our brief and numbered days. Let us turn our eyes away from empty fantasies of this world's divergent forms and serve instead this preeminent purpose, this grand design. You are encouraged to take heart from the Master's assurance that racial prejudice will one day be eliminated from the face of the earth. Although, as the Guardian explained, the road to be traveled will be long and thorny and beset with pitfalls. In summoning us to the great work of creating anew the world, Baha'u'llah exhorts us to adhere to a standard of conduct which he himself so nobly exemplified. Adorn thyself with my virtues, in such wise that should anyone stretch forth the hand of oppression against thee, thou wouldst neither take notice nor contend with him. Leave him to the judgment of thy Lord, the all-powerful, the almighty, the self-subsisting. And be thou long-suffering under all conditions. By God, this is one of mine attributes. Though none but the sincere are apprised of it, know thou then that the patient sighs of the oppressed are dearer to the God than all deeds, could ye but comprehend it. Be patient in whatsoever may befall thee, and put thy trust in God, thy Lord, in all thine affairs. He verily doth suffice thee against the harm inflicted by all that have been and shall be, and doth protect thee within the shelter of his cause and the stronghold of his custody.
I'd like to make a very quick comment, actually just a quote from a famous Black woman about that relates directly to that what was just read. This is from Mary McLeod Bethune. She says, it's about Negro women, but maybe we could apply it to ourselves. Negro women have always known struggle. This heritage is just as much to be desired as any other. Our girls should be taught to appreciate it and welcome it.
You know, this sort of comes to the very heart of the bedrock of our belief in Baha'u'llah's teachings and our belief in God. And the quote that I have memorized and that I have carried with me for years to console myself with when I see hardship is suffered by others or experience my own hardship is a statement. It's quoted by Shoghi Effendi. So the only place you can actually find it is in a book written by Shoghi Effendi, where Baha'u'llah says, I swear by my life, nothing save that which profiteth them can befall my loved ones. And I realized that my loved ones is all humanity because I loved my creation, hence I created thee. There's no one outside the bounds of my loved ones. And so, you know, one of the things that we have to bring to this work is a profound understanding that at its fundamental reality, every soul is safe. Every soul is safe. So George Floyd's soul is safe. That policeman with his knee on his neck was not harming the soul of George Floyd. He took his physical life, but no one has access to the soul. You can do a little harm to your own soul, but I can't hurt your soul, no matter what I do to you. And so we have a culture that teaches us to be afraid. And Baha'u'llah says, if you fear God, you won't fear anything else. And then consoles us with, I swear by my life, nothing save that which profiteth them can befall my loved ones. Now, clearly that's it's not a license to kill, so to speak. It's not a license to be mean-spirited. It's not a license for us to be, to continue on in our ignorance. We all have to answer to God for what we do, not what others do, but what we do. But in the end, we also have to realize that the justice of God is that the souls, and I'll just use George Floyd, I know from this statement of Baha'u'llah that George Floyd's soul was not damaged by this incident, probably was glorified because of the hardship that he suffered, because the hardship yields this rich reward. And so while we move through this long and thorny road and these difficult and painful times on all sides, where sometimes we just feel like our hearts are lying bleeding on the road, we can know that this will profit us. It profits us. And it's a sacrifice every one of us, I think, is willing to make. We're all willing to make the sacrifice to step out and be hurt while we figure ourselves out, just like we do in a family. And we also, of course, have the wondrous joy at times of participating in this profound unified joy that occurs in moments when Baha'is gather together in their love for Baha'u'llah and experience such a profound unity that that the world really has never seen before. He pulls us together in this profound recognition of the oneness of mankind. So I'm wondering if there are any comments that people have about this letter before we move on.
Erika, can I start?
Yes, please.
In these two paragraphs have amazing words like we in one day will one day be eliminated from the face of the earth, this race prejudice. Like right now, I read a lot and hear a lot, like people concentrate in the past what happens, but probably this became be more suffering. If we concentrate in what will be in future, this like positive future concentration, and this will be helpful for everybody. In previous paragraph was still like this problem for both race. Not only one, not only white or black, not only one people or other, both. Like in both directions, we have mistakes. And if we forgive ourselves, forgive other souls, like everybody have mistakes, and concentrate in this like vision future. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a really good prelude to the next letter that we're going to read. We're going to continue right on this same page. And Nikisha, are you willing to read again? I know you love to read.
Yes, yes.
All right, so we're on the sort of middle of page 9. The one that starts, the Universal House of Justice has received your email dated 2 October 2007. 17.
in which you share your experiences and concerns regarding the American Baha'i community and the issues of racism?
Yes.
Okay. Continuing your sentence. The House of Justice appreciates your thoughtful comments and admires your unflagging efforts over many years to address the challenge of racism in your nation, particularly at a time of its overt resurgence in a manner that would justifiably give rise to despair, even in the stoutest heart. However discouraging the present events, however outrageous the injustices laid bare, however intractable the problem appears, such fresh evidences of this pernicious blight on American society can come as no surprise to those friends well informed of Abdu'l-Baha's dire warnings, as well as Shoghi Effendi's trenchant analysis anticipating the ultimate eradication of this evil tendency from the lives and the hearts of their fellow citizens. How much more must people endure in the years ahead? The current polarization in American society makes constructive dialogue and action even more elusive. Even those fair-minded individuals who long to free themselves and their society from this problem, truly a vast portion of the nation, are paralyzed and divided by their divergent views, unable to create the unity necessary to advance along the path of constructive change. It is in this context that the Friends must understand their sacred obligation and the possibilities that lie before them. As you have observed, since the time of Abdu'l-Baha's visit to the United States, Baha'is have, whether individually or collectively, by themselves or in collaboration with others, been continually involved in diverse efforts to address prejudice and racism and build bonds and practices of racial accord. Such efforts, though sincere and even sacrificial, have yet to be raised to the level of systematic endeavor necessary for profound and lasting social change. Among the important lessons garnered over the past 2 decades is that by focusing on insights derived from the most advanced and successful activities, rather than by focusing on shortcomings and weaknesses, the community can come to understand what constitutes effective action and learn to disseminate the knowledge gained. Another lesson is how to approach the development of human resources in a manner that can efficiently multiply efforts and empower those who were previously left on the margins or were otherwise unengaged to become protagonists of a process of community building and social change. Therefore, it is not necessary at this time to propagate in the community a separate program centered on addressing racial prejudice before progress is possible. Nor is there a need to remove one by one all of the obstacles you described before dynamic efforts can be established in a single community or neighborhood that can, once proven to be effective, be widely replicated. Consider, for example, the development of the Junior Youth Spiritual Empowerment Program. Years ago, it was a mere concept. Today, it reaches hundreds of thousands and is having a profound impact on the villages, neighborhoods, islands, and schools where it is being vigorously implemented. This capacity for social transformation, increasingly being realized in the most advanced clusters, encompasses not just the work of community building, but also the engagement of the believers, both in the discourses of society in all accessible social spaces, as well as in projects of social and economic development.
So Nikisha, do you mind, let's stop and dwell on this paragraph for a minute because it's quite full. And I'm wondering if you have some comments to offer.
Yeah, actually, I wanted to respond to, is it Charles Robley, who was talking about forward-looking action.
yeah, it's important for us to know the past so that we don't repeat the past and for other things. But because, you know, you talked about that example where we are the architects building the kingdom of God on earth right now. We need to be very forward looking and know what the vision is so that we can build up something. We have something to look at, to look toward. And that will keep us moving forward is my thought. And this is what it's saying to me in this passage from the compilation.
Yeah, thank you. So just to build on what Nikisha kind of highlighted for us, the House of Justice begins by giving us an important lesson, which as you look at it, you'll see that it's consistent with everything that the writing speaks about, not just in terms of race, but this is a basic spiritual principle that governs the way we approach things. And that's the first sentence where it says, among the important lessons garnered over the past 2 decades is that by focusing on insights derived from the most advanced and successful activities, rather than by focusing on shortcomings and weaknesses, the community can come to understand what constitutes effective action and learn to disseminate the knowledge gained. So I think many Baha'is are aware of this concept that we have of from strength to strength. This concept that we recognize as strength and then we build on the strength. When we focus on the weaknesses, it really disables us because we don't know where to go next. And we can actually get lost in hopelessness and negativity. When you focus on the weaknesses, you're focusing on what's not there, what's absent. When you focus on the strengths, you focus on what is there, the presence, the existence of something, right? And so we live in a culture that is completely focused on the absence, on what's not there. So we see it, we live in a culture where to be morally right, you have to be anti, fill in the blank. You're anti-racism. No, you're anti-Black racism. No, you're anti one political party. You're anti something else. A few voices rise up and say, we are for social justice. And it's refreshing when we see that there, but then there are some that say, no justice, no peace. So you see the divisiveness and the focus on the absences goes beyond the acknowledgement of history, which as Nikisha so eloquently said, we have to remember the history, but not dwell on it. It's not, it just helps us not do the same thing again. Like when you reflect, you act and then you reflect. And one of the things you decide is what worked. And then you can't, essentially you're casting aside the things that don't work when you look at what worked. So that's what history gives us, right? We look at it and say slavery doesn't work. We don't like it, it doesn't work, it isn't good for humanity. But we could get lost in all of that and it would just spiral down into the helplessness and hopelessness of that. Instead, if we look forward and look at what works. And so the House of Justice, they are sticking to their guns. No matter how difficult this issue is, the House of Justice brings us right back to the solution is be in a learning mode, look at what works, and then propagate that learning. So I don't know about you, but this rouses in me a desire to be able to do that work to such a degree that actually it could provide learning. I mean, you live in different clusters. You all live in different neighborhoods. If you rolled up your sleeves and actually put this in action, you could be that next advanced area where we're seeing what works and where your experiences in a junior youth program or in a study circle or in your devotional gatherings or in your conscious focus on those who've been marginalized to develop capacity and raise them up as protagonists, light the way for everyone else on how we can do this. So I guess that's been an overarching theme this last 4 days, but it is the overarching theme in our in this material. Yeah, Sandy, I see your hand up.
I also noticed the last part of that paragraph.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, we need to do what you're saying exactly, but that doesn't mean we can't reach out. It says not just the work of community building, but also the engagement of the believers, both in the discourses of society and in all accessible social spaces.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm finding what I see in my area is there's a lot of focus on building junior youth, children's classes, etc., but there's no reaching out anymore. It's all focused inward. And I think as Baha'is, we need to reach out more, find like-minded groups, and show people that there's something to come to instead of just building it and hoping they will come.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that that is something, we're in an early stage in learning about that in some clusters, but in other clusters, the norm is that we are partnering with like-minded people. There's a very subtle but profound shift that has to take place in all Baha'i thinking right now in terms of the action. We are not building congregations. And I think that's part of what you're talking about, Sandy, is that Baha'is are not building congregations of those who come to our meetings, and you know what I'm saying? It's not about come to the meetings, it's not about that. It's actually about building capacity for community building, not Baha'i community building,
right?
Community building, right? And so a couple days ago, we were talking about how we have to really think about how we invite people to participate. If we think of each person, the child, the junior youth, the adult, whether it's a study circle, a devotional gathering, children's program, a children's class, or a junior youth spiritual empowerment program, if we invite them to be protagonists from the very beginning, it changes everything. And so in participating in the discourses of society, the House of Justice has said we need to do that. Now, not everybody has that capacity, but we do need to do that. Those who can, should. But they don't necessarily need to do that exclusively, because you're participating in the discourses of society when you are having a junior youth spiritual empowerment program and you're talking about the twofold moral purpose and the vision for the forward advancement of civilization that you, a junior youth, will contribute to by looking at your neighborhood or your area and deciding what needs to be done. And the same thing with social action. Social action grows out of these community building activities. So every junior youth spiritual empowerment program chooses a service project, which is the budding of a social action movement in their community. And they learn how to assess the needs and to consult with others and to decide. And then they make a decision about what they need to do, how they can serve their community and bring about change. And of course, the animators help them not go in the direction of politics, but rather in the direction of true solutions. And some very profound things have grown out of the junior youth spiritual empowerment programs, because junior youth, God bless their vision, they are not bounded by our experience, and they are willing to move mountains when the rest of us would say, do you know how hard it is to move a mountain? They don't care. So anyway, I think it's integrated is what I'm saying.
Yeah, we need both.
Yeah, it has to do with a shift in Baha'i thinking. If you walk away from this class and you have shifted your thinking from offering a service, inviting people to come participate with us, you see, like we are the host and you are the guest in your mind. If you've determined that you're going to shift yourself from that to inviting people to become protagonists in community building, in their town, in their neighborhood, in their organization, and whatever it is, you will have achieved that, because you won't see, it's a false dichotomy to say, are we community building or are we participating in the discourses of society? Are we community building or are we doing social action? That's a false dichotomy. So thank you for raising that, because if it's kind of siloed in people's minds, then we haven't actually seen the full vision of the House of Justice.
Yeah, because right now, most of the community building is only among the Baha'is. There are. Yeah,
well, that changes very quickly.
I'm sorry?
That changes very quickly as a cluster moves to a more advanced stage, because you really can't grow if you just limit yourself to the Baha'is. And
So
as we saw in the first passages we read that first day, the House of Justice said, we cannot solve this problem without a massive expansion in those who have embraced the vision of Baha'u'llah. That's still true today. It was true 4 days ago, and it's still true today. We have to we have to keep that in mind as we're thinking about everything else. But let's go back to this paragraph now.
thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Sandy. I don't want to diminish the importance of what you raised, because we do have to explore these and understand them. Yeah, so thanks so much. So the first lesson that they identify is what? That if we focus on the strengths and learn where we already have good experience and then disseminate that we can then quickly spread the knowledge around the world. This is one of the strengths of the Baha'i community, is that we can communicate learning from the other side of the planet to this side of the planet, or this side of the planet to that side of the planet in just days, and certainly within cycles. So we have access to the most advanced learning anywhere on the planet at all times, and the International Teaching Center is keeping watch over all of that and feeding it down through the institution of the counselors into your auxiliary board members, and you have access to that most advanced learning. So if you're curious about where we have learning about how the core activities actually advance the elimination of racial prejudice, you talk to your board member. They know where in North America we're already seeing that result. And so, because that agility of that institution, where knowledge from one side of the planet can make its way to the grassroots of another side of the planet overnight, basically, is because we have this extraordinary institution of the International Teaching Center and the counselors. And that's one of the roles they play, is to disseminate this knowledge. The National Assembly and the regional councils have responsibilities to disseminate knowledge as well. But elected institutions don't have quite the same agility as the counselors do, because we're bodies that consult, and the counselors and the board members are individuals that act in the role of carrying out the work of that institution. Okay, so look at the strength and disseminate the knowledge. That's the first one. The second one is how to approach the development of human resources. And I spoke about this earlier in this week, that we have to, every one of us, black or white, we have to be conscious about who it is that we are accompanying into the advancement of this plan. Because whoever we invite, that's a conscious decision, even if you're just making it lightly. It's a conscious decision. So they're saying another lesson is how to approach the development of human resources in a manner that can efficiently multiply efforts and empower those who were previously left on the margins or were otherwise unengaged. Now, in the next paragraph that Nikisha is going to read in a moment, the House of Justice refers to the 25 February 2017 letter from the National Spiritual Assembly, in which they reminded us that the historically important populations, the African American population and the American Indian population, are still important. And we still have to pay special attention to reaching out to and bringing large numbers of those people into this work. And then they also added, because our times are now what the times are, a third population, which is the immigrant populations that we have all over North America. And you know, every cluster has immigrants, every cluster has Black people, and every cluster has American Indians. Even if they're small by percentage wise, every one of those souls counts. So that letter that the National Assembly just reminded us in 2017, that the importance of actually consciously raising these populations, embracing them and raising them up, that priority still exists. It existed in the time of the Guardian, and it still exists. So here we are, looking at the solution to the elimination of racial prejudice. You can't do that if you don't have diversity in your community in numbers enough to be able to actually make it work. So Nikisha, did you turn on your video because you're going to say something?
No, I'm just ready to go.
Okay, all right. So then, and then the last part of this paragraph, they remind us it's not time, it isn't necessary for us to have a separate effort. in order to solve this problem, that we have to actually be in action in order for it to be solved. And we have an action plan. It's the 5-year plan. The community building efforts, the participation in discourse and social action, that's the plan. So we don't need something separate. And then they remind us about the development of this Junior Youth Spiritual Empowerment Program, where we have seen some of the most profound changes at the level of culture. And I shared with you one story from Widening Embrace about one of the Pacific Island countries where they had emptied the jails and completely turned the culture around in terms of the role that the 3,500 or 3,700 junior youth in their island were playing, going from basically terrorizing the population to building up the population and advancing the civilization on that island. So we have plenty of examples now that we can turn to and look towards. Okay. You ready to continue, Nikki?
Yeah, do I start from the 25 February?
Yes, thank you.
The 25 February 2017 letter of your National Assembly was written following consultations held at the Baha'i World Center. It's not intended simply to express a renewed concern with the challenges of race in your society, and certainly not to introduce a new set of activities. It is a commitment to a path of systematic action and learning involving community building, social action, and participation in the discourses of society, from which the community will never withdraw until the problems of race are completely resolved, no matter how long and difficult the path may be. Already, your National Assembly is aware of the strivings of thousands of friends who, like yourself, are engaged in initiatives of varying scope and effectiveness along these lines. Through systematization and learning, there is every confidence that as each year goes by, we will understand the issues involved more deeply, act more effectively, and enlarge the circle of those with whom we are engaged. The House of Justice hopes that those friends in the United States who resolve to renew their commitment to uprooting racism and laying the basis for a society that reflects interracial harmony can draw insight and inspiration from the unwavering resolve of the Baha'is in Iran. The messages written to the friends there in recent years, most of which have been translated into English and are publicly available, are instructive in this regard. For almost 2 centuries, and particularly the last 4 decades of relentless oppression, the Baha'is in Iran have remained forward-looking, dynamic, vibrant, and committed to serving Iranian society. They have refused to allow apprehension and anxiety to take hold or let any calamity perturb their hearts. They have drawn on the highest reservoirs of solidarity and collaboration and responded to oppression with constructive resilience, eschewing despair, surrender, resentment, and hate, and transcending mere survival to transform conditions of ignorance and prejudice and win the respect and collaboration of their fair-minded countrymen. Those believers in the United States who have labored so persistently to promote race unity, especially the African-American friends, should appreciate in their own effort over the years the same expression of constructive resilience, born of their great love for Baha'u'llah, and see in the recent turmoil opportunity rather than obstacle. They cannot, as you know, respond to the current reality in a manner consuming most of their fellow citizens. They must, by word and by deed, elevate the existing conversation and set in motion constructive approaches that will prove ever more effective over time. Shoghi Effendi has explained that such problems as are now being witnessed are inevitable as the process of disintegration advances. Quote, all humanity, a letter written on his behalf observes, is disturbed and suffering and confused. We cannot expect to not be disturbed and not to suffer, but we don't have to be confused, unquote. The way forward has never been clearer, particularly with the new initiative of your National Assembly to organize these matters within the proven framework for action, guiding the Baha'i world's systematic endeavors. That's from a letter dated the 4th of February, 2018. The Universal House of Justice.
Comment.
You want me to stop?
Yeah, I wonder if you have some comments. This last two paragraphs that you read are rather rich.
Yes, they are rather rich, and I've read this document several times. So sometimes things are more clear, sometimes they're all a blur. But one thing I do have is I have this portion, I have a portion of it highlighted. That paragraph that starts with the House of Justice hopes that those friends in the United States. I have in the middle of that paragraph highlighted for almost 2 centuries, and particularly the last 4 decades of relentless oppression. It talks about the Baha'is of Iran, how they're forward-looking, dynamic, vibrant, and committed to serving Iranian society. They have this constructive resilience that is absolutely amazing. And the House of Justice is saying that the African-American friends can look at that and see that we also have that in us and move forward with it. What I also know from being a Baha'i is that we cannot go out and teach and share by ourselves. Teaching the faith and sharing the faith and serving and practicing social action in our societies is so much more effective when we have our Baha'i brothers and sisters who are not Black alongside us. Also, the very last part of this letter that's dated the 4th of February, 2018, what Shoghi Effendi says, and this is what a lot of people I know remember. They remember that, I remember the part that says, we don't have to be confused. But he says, altogether, all humanity is disturbed and suffering and confused. But we cannot expect not to be disturbed and not to suffer. We're human. But we don't have to be confused. We really don't, because it says, the next line says, the way forward has never been clearer. And we can see that. And that's the conversation I believe I could have with the believers and with my well-wishers, to organize the matters within the proven framework of action for action that we already have.
I wonder if anyone else has a comment. Suang, I see your hand.
Ali, good morning, friends, and also people I don't know. In page, I turned the page. In page 10, and the paragraph starting the 25th February 2017 letter, halfway through paragraph, it says, participation in the discourses of society. I took year 1 of ISGP and we spent 10 days talking about participation in discourses of society, but still this phrase is, I still don't know what it means and what it looks like and if I've seen it happen. And then number 2 is, in the page 11 at the very end of, right above, from a letter dated 4 February 2018, the last sentence, the way forward has never been clearer, particularly with the new initiative. I also don't know if I know exactly what this means. So thank you.
So, you know, the National Assembly wrote a triage, a triad of letters, all referring to each other and essentially reminding us of the importance of, as they referred to it, historically important populations along with immigrants, and also reminding us of the need for a large expansion and the need for for us to become clear about how the way forward is within the context of the plan. So these are long letters, and I've done a terrible job of summarizing them, but they're available to you. You can go out, you got them at Feast, you've studied them in your communities, hopefully, and you can go back and review them now. Remember these letters from the House of Justice were written right at that time, and they had actually consulted with the National Assembly. They invited 4 members of the National Assembly to come and consult with them as the National Assembly re-looked at its responsibility to make freedom from racial prejudice the watchword of the entire Baha'i community. So we have those documents available to us. I see your hand, Mary Beth, but just let me finish this thought. You mentioned ISGP, which maybe not everybody is familiar with. And I might just, so maybe I can just sketch this program. The Institute for the Study of Global Prosperity is something that the House of Justice is nurturing worldwide amongst college students and postgrads, which will actually develop their capacity to participate in the discourses in their fields. Both first to develop the capacity to participate in the discourses of society on various topics while they're in college, to help them learn how to effectively think about, write, and convey in a variety of ways the Baha'i vision that applies to their fields of study, and then to then prepare themselves to be able to contribute to thought in whatever their fields are. So that's a very quick, and so because it's a summary, it doesn't do it justice. But the House of Justice and the National Assemblies are very, they're very hopeful that every Baha'i college student will participate. So when you see those announcements that registration is open for ISGP, it behooves us all to make sure that those youth that are in our communities or that we know of that are in college are going to those, to that program, because the more of them that can participate, even if they've gone through one like you are, and you're saying, I'm still not completely clear about, yeah, well, that's because you've actually explored it in more depth. And some of us may think we know what we're talking about, but as you get into it, you realize it's actually quite nuanced and complex, right? But by the time you finish those 4 years, you'll probably feel fairly fluent in not only what social participating in the discourses of society are, but also how it applies in your field of study and you know, lays a groundwork for your future participation as you move into your careers. Were you going to say something more about that? No? Okay. All right. Yeah, Mary Beth, I saw your hand.
In thinking about that and also thinking about some of the comments yesterday, I began to be thinking about, as a Baha'i community, you know, Baha'u'llah talks about how we've been in our infancy and now we're moving towards our teenage years, so to speak, as we are moving forward to a more mature society. And I was thinking about that in terms of how we've always talked, and we've tended to talk about, well, you have to have your 1 minute speech about what is Baha'i, and you have to, and we've talked in snippets. And I began to realize that if it fits on a t-shirt, it's not a conversation. It's not an elevated conversation. And it really hit home yesterday when I was on the evil social media and looking at, somebody was talking about the All Lives Matter versus Black Lives Matter, and somebody had mentioned one race, the human race, that equated to all lives matter, and that was degrading. And it really hit my heart, because that's something that as Baha'is we always talk about, that there's one race, the human race. And here somebody was comparing it to something very negative. And I began to realize that that's not a conversation, that's a quip, that's a t-shirt. And that one of the things the House of Justice is saying here is that in preparing to elevate the conversation, we have to be able to bring the teachings into our conversations at a higher level than just a saying or just, you know, Baha'u'llah said this and give a little quip. We have to be able to elaborate on it. We have to be able to tie it into what's happening. We have to be able to make it relevant. And I think that's where that paragraph is kind of going in that. And yes, it's very nuanced. We all have a long way to go with it.
Yeah, this reminds me of a statement that Baha'u'llah made. And I think it's relevant here since we're talking about conversation. And thank you for raising that, Mary Beth. Just reminding us that a quip or a slogan is not a conversation. A conversation actually can be quite long. It can go over days. Anybody who's been married knows that you have conversations that can last for decades around various topics. And that's because we don't degenerate into wrangling. We sometimes have to separate for a while to sort of stop the conversation, get our minds and hearts back reorganized so that we can then go back in and participate actually as a grown-up in the conversation. So let me just share this with you. It's from page 27 of Balyuzi's book called Abdu'l-Baha, The Center of the Covenant of Baha'u'llah. This is Baha'u'llah's description of how Abdu'l-Baha teaches, basically, and essentially how he participates in the conversation. Let's see. He says, the most great branch gives a willing ear to any manner of senseless talk. So Mary Beth, this is to console you and all of us who have those experiences. Gives a willing ear to any manner of senseless talk to such an extent that the other person says to himself, he is trying to learn from me. He is trying to learn from me. And he precedes that by talking more specifically about Baha'u'llah, Abdu'l-Baha's style. And so he says, a pleasing, kindly disposition and a display of tolerance towards the people are requisites for teaching the cause. Whenever a person says, hollow and product of vain imaginings and a parrot-like repetition of somebody else's views, though it be, and we certainly are seeing plenty of that these days, including ourselves doing it, unfortunately, Baha'u'llah says one ought to let it pass. So one thing is, you don't have to engage in everything. You don't have to engage at all, right? One should not engage in disputation leading to an ending with obstinate refusal and hostility, because the other person would consider himself worsted and defeated. Consequently, further veils intervene between him and the cause, and he becomes more negligent of it. One ought to say, right, admitted, but look at the matter in this other way and judge for yourself whether it is true or false. Of course, it should be said with courtesy, with kindliness, with consideration. Then the other person will listen, will not seek to answer back and to marshal proofs in repudiation. He will agree because he comes to realize that the purpose has not been to engage in verbal battle and to gain mastery over him. He sees that the purpose has been to impart the word of truth, to show humanity, to bring forth heavenly qualities. His eyes and his ears are opened, his heart responds, his true nature unfolds, and by the grace of God, he becomes a new creation. So that finding a way to find a point of agreement, you see that with the House of Justice in all these opening paragraphs where they so lovingly acknowledge what the writer has said to them. Sometimes, of course, those writers are making suggestions about solutions that the House of Justice rejects. But they don't start by saying, that's a dumb idea. Haven't you read our letters? Don't you know what Baha'u'llah says about this? Instead, they say you're thoughtful, your long service, your heartfelt, they find the ways to acknowledge. And then the other thing that they help us see is that we have to be able to identify the aspirations that people have. And so whether they're labeling this anti-this or for, whatever, those aspirations actually, at the level of aspiration, we can meet. So on any side of a subject, there are people who they have a different solution that they're suggesting, and they could be completely polar opposites in terms of the action that they're ascribing to, but their desire is the same on both sides of that argument. their aspiration is that we live in a society where we can raise our children, where we can feel safe in our neighborhoods, where we are able to take care of our needs, and that others are able to take care of their needs. So at that level of aspiration, we all agree. And so if we don't get caught in the details, and rather keep focusing at the level of principle, and because otherwise, how can you say right, agreed? You know, so when we think about people who are focused on anti-racism, where we are focused on freedom from racial prejudice, we're not going to engage in verbal mastery over them and say, don't you realize that anti-racism is just negative? We would never do that, because we know that the aspiration of their hearts is actually right in line with us, with what Baha'u'llah, not with us, but with what Baha'u'llah teaches. And so we might use our own language, but not in a corrective way, but rather in participating in a conversation where we have agreement between us. And then hearts are bound together, and gradually curiosity begins to show itself, because Baha'is know the way forward. And we are not confused. Yeah, I see your hand again, Suang. Is it Suang or Suang?
You were right the first time, Suang.
Suang? Okay, thank you.
I made this note last time, but I didn't know how to share it. So now it's a good time. So I'm glad I wrote it. So yay, tools of writing. So we were talking about like definitives and infinitives. You never listen to me. I always do the dishes. You have a good point, but so I've in my language we say like words are just air. Don't let it hit you. But it's there. I'm trying to be careful with my words. So when somebody says something, I try to say yes and da, 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 like I'm adding to your conversation, like a soup. When you put in the salt and somebody else puts in the pepper, you can't take back the salt because it's already part of the conversation of the soup, and then we all have it. And so we have to be careful with our words. Otherwise, you're going to put in a poison, and then everybody dies. So this, yes, and so that's a good example from our institutions. Is they're very good examples of how to be good parents to ourselves and others. The end.
Thank you. So let's take a moment now before we move on to the next letter to go back and look at how Abdu'l-Baha handled things when they weren't exactly to his liking. And look on page 12, the story right above the one that we read first this morning. So it's called "If the People See That One Colored Person Has Entered My Hotel." It's number 20. And so, Gregory, would you be willing to read this one? And while he's getting himself unmuted, I just want to say it might be helpful for you to think in terms of the guidance we've just read about building on strengths. And as you look at what happened in this story that's described. And it's interesting also to look through Mirza Mahmud's diary through his eyes, because he was a Persian observing us. A Persian Baha'i there to serve Baha'u'llah, Abdu'l-Baha as a translator. And he makes some comments at the end as a detached observer looking at race prejudice in our society. Okay, go for it, Dave.
The friends arranged a banquet in commemoration of the Day of the Covenant and the journey of the beloved of all hearts. Today, many came to the master with bouquets of flowers in their hands. The banquet was held in the ballroom of New York's Grand Northern Hotel. This evening's banquet was so grand that the hotel staff were curious to know about the cause. They came to see the master, to ask about the banquet and why so many distinguished Americans were praising and glorifying a person from the East. The next day, a gathering of Black Baha'is was held at the home of Mrs. Kinney. They had been invited by the New York Baha'is to attend the banquet of the Covenant, but when the proprietor of the hotel heard about it, he was not pleased. The more the friends endeavored to persuade him, the more vehement was his refusal. He said, If the people see that one colored person has entered my hotel, no respectable person will ever set foot in it, and my business will go to the winds. Such is the depth of prejudice between blacks and whites. Since it was impossible to invite the black Baha'is to the banquet, the friends arranged today's feast for their black brothers. Many white women came forward to serve their black guests, showering them with love. The master approved of this meeting very much, and he said, "Today, you have carried out the laws of the Blessed Beauty and have truly acted according to the teachings of the Supreme Pen. Behold what an influence and effect the words of Baha'u'llah have had upon the hearts, that hating and shunning have been forgotten, and that prejudices have been obliterated to such an extent that you arose to serve one another with great sincerity." The master's words made a great impression. The meeting embodied the grandeur of the covenant and demonstrated the power and influence of the cause in uniting, in sincerity and love, two races of humanity.
So we know in our world that there are certain realities that yet cannot be changed. And yet Abdu'l-Baha built on the strength of the Baha'is' love. And then what did he choose to comment about? He chose to comment about this banquet and how it pleased him and how this had been, he actually claimed it to be very important, right? Today you have carried out the laws of the Blessed Beauty and have truly acted according to the teachings of the Supreme Pen. Wouldn't any one of us give our lives for Abdu'l-Baha to say that about us and something we had done? Oh my goodness. Behold what an influence and effects the words of Baha'u'llah have had upon the hearts, that hating and shunning have been forgotten and that prejudices have been obliterated to such an extent that you arose to serve one another with great sincerity. So this is what Abdu'l-Baha chose to praise. He made no comment about what had happened the day before. It was impossible for those circumstances to be changed at that moment. And so instead he chose to highlight the strength. And that's what we remember. We don't remember much about actually the big banquet. What we remember is this tender moment, this scene that is described by Mahmoud in his diary of white women serving their black brothers and sisters with great sincerity and love. Yeah. Comments? All right, friends, well, we are drawing to a close, and as always, there's never enough time. But I think it's time for us now to take a minute to read this message from the Baha'is of the United States to the American people. And I'm wondering if we can be sort of symbolic about this and choose a white reader and a black reader to go every other paragraph. So in actuality, we can sort of feel what Nakisha was saying, which is it's more effective if white and black work together than if we're working alone. So is there a person? That I have missed.
Have this letter. I don't have this letter that you're talking about.
So this is the message from the Baha'is of the United States. It's the third document that is linked in the chat. We haven't looked at it yet. This is the, remember I told you we would end by reading this this statement together. This is the one that was published on Juneteenth. You all got it at Feast. Your local spiritual assemblies got it. And if you go into the chat, you'll see the NSA's message. It's called NSA message : and there's a link to it.
Yeah, I have it with me. I'm sorry.
So have you all found it now? Yes, okay, I think we're good to go. All right, so Sam Settlemeyer, are you willing to read? I don't see your face, but I see that you're on the screen.
Yeah, I hope my internet is up to the task, if that is something that would be helpful for the group.
So far, so good. So we have a young white man. I'm doing this very deliberately, friends, so excuse me. So Nikisha, I'm going to put you on the spot again. I know you love this statement. Would you be willing to read along? And you guys can take turns on the paragraphs. And we're just going to read it straight through.
That's what I was thinking.
Yes, we're on the same page.
Yeah.
All right, so we'll start with Nikisha, and then we'll, Nikisha and Sam, you're going to dance together on this one and read every other paragraph. Everybody has the document now, right? Okay, good.
Okay. A message from the Baha'is of the United States. The Baha'is of the United States join our fellow citizens in heartfelt grief at the deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery, and so many others whose lives were suddenly taken by appalling acts of violence. These heartbreaking violations against fellow human beings, due only to the color of their skin, have deepened the dismay caused by a pandemic whose consequences to the health and livelihoods of people of color have been disproportionately severe. This has come to pass against the backdrop of longstanding racial injustice in virtually every aspect of American life. It is clear that racial prejudice is the most vital and challenging issue we face as a country.
Yet amidst these tragedies, there are also signs of hope. Countless citizens have arisen to proclaim the truth that we are one nation and to demand specific actions to address the pervasive inequities that for too long have shaped our society. We have remembered who we aspire to be as a people and are determined to make a change for the better. This moment beckons us to a renewed commitment to realize the ideal of e pluribus unum, out of many, one, the very ideal upon which America was founded.
To create a just society begins with recognition of the fundamental truth that humanity is one. But it is not enough simply to believe this in our hearts. It creates a moral imperative to act and to view all aspects of our personal, social, and institutional lives through the lens of justice. It implies a reordering of our society more profound than anything we have yet achieved. And it requires the participation of Americans of every race and background, for it is only through such inclusive participation that new moral and social directions can emerge.
Whatever immediate results might come from the current demonstrations, the elimination of racism will require a sustained and concerted effort. It is one thing to protest against particular forms of injustice. It is a far more profound challenge to create a new framework for justice. Our efforts can only succeed when we learn to build relationships with each other based on sincere friendship, regard, and trust, which in turn become pillars for the activities of our institutions and communities.
It is essential for us to join hands in a process of learning how to create models of what we want to see in every dimension of American life. As we learn to apply the principle of oneness through practical engagement and experience. To this end, we offer the following thoughts.
An essential element of the process will be honest and truthful discourse about current conditions and their causes, and understanding, in particular, the deeply entrenched notions of anti-Blackness that pervade our society. We must build the capacity to truly hear and acknowledge the voices of those who have directly suffered from the effects of racism. This capacity should manifest itself in our schools, the media, and other civic arenas, as well as in our work and personal relations. This should not end with words, but lead to meaningful, constructive action.
There are already significant efforts underway to learn how to create models of unity in neighborhoods and communities throughout the nation. Baha'is have been persistently engaged in such efforts for many years. The aim is not unity in sameness, it is unity in diversity. It is the recognition that everyone in this land has a part to play in contributing to the betterment of society, and that true prosperity, material and spiritual, will be available to us all to the degree that we live up to this standard. We should earnestly discover what is being done, what truly helps to make a difference, and why. We should share this knowledge throughout the country as a means of inspiring and assisting the work of others. If we do this, we could soon find ourselves in the midst of a mass transition toward racial justice.
Religion, an enduring source of insight concerning human purpose and action, has a key role to play in this process. All faith communities recognize that we are essentially spiritual beings. All proclaim some version of the golden rule: to love others as we do ourselves. Take, for example, the following passage from the Baha'i scriptures in which God addresses humankind.
Know ye not why we created you all from the same dust? That no one should exalt himself over the other. Ponder at all times in your hearts how ye were created. Since we have created you all from one same substance, it is incumbent on you to be even as one soul, to walk with the same feet, eat with the same mouth, and dwell in the same land. That from your inmost being, by your deeds and actions, the signs of oneness and the essence of detachment may be made manifest.
To understand and firmly believe that we all are all children of God provides us with access to vast spiritual resources, motivating us to see beyond ourselves and to work steadily and sacrificially in the face of all obstacles. It helps to ensure that the process is consistent with the goal to create communities characterized by justice. It gives us the faith, strength, and creativity to transform our own hearts as we also work for the transformation of society.
We believe that the tribulations now encompassing much of the world are the symptoms of humanity's failure to understand and embrace our essential oneness. The interrelated threats of climate change, gender discrimination, extreme wealth and poverty, unfair distribution of resources, and the like, all stem from this deficiency and can never be resolved if we do not awaken to our dependence upon each other. The world has contracted to a neighborhood, and it is important to appreciate that what we do in America impacts not only our own country, but the entire planet.
We should also never forget that the richness of our diversity and our founding ideals of liberty and justice attract the eyes of the world to us. They will be influenced by what we achieve or fail to achieve in this regard. It is not an exaggeration to say that the cause of world peace is linked to our success in resolving the issue of racial injustice.
The oneness of humanity is the foundation of our future. Its realization is the inevitable next stage in our life on this planet. We will replace a world society based upon competition and conflict and driven by rampant materialism with one founded upon our high potential for collaboration and reciprocity. This achievement will mark the universal coming of age of the human race. How soon we achieve this and how easily will depend upon the commitment we demonstrate to this cardinal principle.
We have come to a moment of great public awareness and rejection of injustice. Let us not lose this opportunity. Will we commit to the process of forming a more perfect union? Will we be guided by the better angels of our nature to choose the course of wisdom, of courage, and of unity? Will we choose to become that city upon a hill, to serve as inspiration to all humanity? Let us then join hands with each other in commitment to the path of justice. Together, we can surely achieve this.
Baha'u'llah said, "So powerful is the light of unity that it can illuminate the whole earth. May that light grow brighter with every passing day." The National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of the United States.
Thank you, friends. I hope that this course has helped stimulate your thinking, clarified some thoughts, helped you become not confused. And also this last reading of the statement. It's a statement, it's not a letter, it's a statement from the National Spiritual Assembly to the American people, has given you ideas about how you might propagate this letter. This statement. People refer to it as a letter all the time, and it's not really. And that then you can do things right away as individuals, but you can also then work with your communities to find ways in which this statement might be spread far and wide. This is, it can go on every one of your Facebook pages, and it can be Twittered out and Snapchatted out and whatever else the social media stuff does, but also communities can find ways to bring it to the attention of like-minded organizations in their community. And we all can be focused on the action elements of this statement. It's high-minded. It states the greatest longing in the heart of every fair-minded citizen in our country. But we also have been looking at the guidance of the House of Justice, which we didn't read all of, which I hope you will go back and finish the reading and the talking about, which has so clearly laid before us this path, so we aren't confused. And at the beginning I said, my hope for this is just watchword of the entire American Baha'i community, freedom from racial prejudice, that we would find the way to let that find itself expressed in every one of the activities we undertake. That would imply a thoughtfulness in terms of who we engage with, a mindfulness of building capacity in those people who have been marginalized, and setting that as a priority. And I expressed my own hope that we would come to see here in the Northwest region a greater of people in the diverse achieve that would have a great that was engaged with, and that would be the finest hour for us. Actually be building the capacity for building communities that are standing that the solution to racial prejudice is a profound interracial fellowship. Thank you, friends. This has been wonderful. I'm so happy that so many of you could so aloha. We'll see you next time. Love you all.
Wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Erica.
Thank you, Shar.